Labour government officials want Andy Burnham to revive the idea of war bonds, a form of borrowing, to pay for higher defence spending when he becomes Prime Minister, according to The Guardian. What's wrong with simply taxing the super rich for it on the grounds that they benefit most from a secure United Kingdom? I floated that idea previously because it has a historical precedent and is clearly justifiable if there really is a need for higher defence spending. Borrowing is fast and administratively simple. The government already issues gilts and could create a new bond product relatively quickly, I know. Conversely, a serious wealth tax would require legislation, definitions of taxable assets, valuation systems, enforcement mechanisms, anti-avoidance measures, and probably lengthy consultation. If the objective then is to increase defence spending within months rather than years, borrowing is the easier route. Also, borrowing spreads costs over time. Defence equipment often has a lifespan of decades, and economists often argue that if future generations will benefit from protection provided by investment today, they should help pay for it. This is the same logic used for infrastructure projects. And while wealth taxes poll well in abstract surveys, governments become nervous when they move to implementation because the people affected tend to be wealthy, well-connected, politically influential, and able to fund legal challenges, lobbying campaigns, and media opposition. A government can often borrow billions with less political resistance than it can raise a few billion through new taxes on wealth. Additionally, some policymakers genuinely believe that capital taxes damage investment, although that is heavily disputed. The Treasury has traditionally been cautious about any tax that might encourage wealthy individuals or businesses to rearrange their affairs, move assets, or alter investment decisions. And that brings us to the Treasury, which appears to have opposed both defence bonds and the Canadian-led Defence Bank Initiative. So the people pushing war bonds are trying to get around Treasury orthodoxy. The line seems to be, if we can't persuade the Treasury to raise taxes or borrow conventionally, perhaps we can create a politically attractive form of borrowing specifically linked to defence. The proposed inheritance tax exemption is particularly revealing. Under the plans drawn up in Number 10 and championed by Starmer's business advisor Varun Chandra, the government would have issued up to £20 billion of bonds which would have been exempt from inheritance tax. That is not really aimed at ordinary savers then. It is for wealthy investors and families engaged in estate planning. The idea being that they would accept lower returns because they receive a tax advantage elsewhere. But isn't that a contradiction? Doesn't it mean the proposal could become a subsidy to wealth holders rather than a tax on them? And if this offers them a tax break in exchange for lending money to the government, where is the financial advantage to the state? There is another possible explanation for a Labour government introducing borrowing rather than a new tax. Many politicians regard borrowing as politically reversible and technically neutral. A government can issue bonds this year and repay them over decades. A wealth tax, once introduced, creates a much larger ideological argument about redistribution, ownership, and the role of the state. Historically, though, I think my point is still well grounded. During both World Wars, the UK combined borrowing with much higher taxation of high incomes, excess profits, and wealth. The famous war bonds of the 20th century existed alongside substantial tax increases. The historical precedent is therefore not borrow instead of taxing the wealthy, it is usually borrow and tax the wealthy. And that raises a new question. Why is the discussion framed as a choice between borrowing and spending cuts when governments facing major security challenges have mixed borrowing, taxation, and economic mobilization?